Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the take on this final day of the week. It's Friday. It's been an unbelievable week. We've had movement. We've had record highs. We've had just a little bit of just about everything. So when we look at yesterday, and I take a look over at the NASDAQ, and again, very choppy, very tight range, and actually finished up, but only up about 18 points or thereabouts. Then you look over at the Dow, and once again, we had the Dow that was performing to the upside. It was up early, about 100 points, give or take. Finished the day up about 131 points, so a pretty nice performing day, but it got a little bit dull later in the day. We're watching that volatility get closer and closer to that low 15s level. The interesting part is this. We still have some pretty decent volumes trading as of yesterday. Now, we'll see what happens today because I can already tell you some of the boots on the ground that I've already seen going a lot of different places early this morning, including the gym and everything else. Very, very quiet. A lot of people on the road. A lot of people are getting out there and doing their thing and getting ready for the long weekend. But we still yesterday traded almost 35 million contracts, traded 34.7 million contracts yesterday. So it was a very active day once again. So we'll see if that plays out today and continues. But Apple and NIO, those were the only two names that actually traded a million contracts yesterday. The rest were spread out pretty nicely. I got Tesla, 855,000. Then you got AMD and AMC and all those various names kind of kicking in just below that. But a pretty nice broad participation once again. I bring that up because there was a time where it was Apple, it was Tesla, and it was maybe one other, and it was making up a very large percentage of what we were seeing for the full total volumes. That's really not the case anymore. We are seeing a nice spread across many, many, many names. And that, I think, part of the healthiness of the markets that we find ourselves in. So tech did lag a little bit early on. As a matter of fact, you look over at the semiconductors, it's unusual, but we did see the semiconductors under a little bit of pressure yesterday, finishing down about 1% or something like that, a little bit more than that, but nothing huge. And specific names continue to perform to the upside. And then the bulk of the semiconductors are what really makes up that movement that we're seeing to the downside. So I mentioned volatility in those low 15s. What continues to be very volatile, and you'll understand why I say that again, because yesterday, did you take a look at energy? We talked about that here on the take. We talked about those big moves. You had Diamondback, you had Occidental, you had Schlumberger, you had Marathon, you had Conoco, you had Halliburton, all of those, Pioneer, all performing to the upside. You look at the XOP, which I always use this reference because when I look at this particular ETF, that is where many, not all, but many of these names that we reference all the time as the beta names, those are within that particular ETF. And that ETF yesterday hit another new high, multi-year high, over 100. So a really strong reaction for energy. A couple of standouts yesterday in terms of just performance itself outside of the energy space. Nike had a nice turn. It wasn't up early, and then suddenly it started to move to the upside. When I checked on it towards the end of the day, I think it was up 2.25%. Nice performance on that particular name. Sticking with energy a little bit, Chevron, you can't, it's not just, I do focus a lot on these beta names. It isn't just the beta names, some of the big names as well. Chevron yesterday, 1.4% to the upside. So you're seeing the participation across energy. Of course, you're getting these monstrous moves in those beta names because when you see something like Chevron going up 1.5%, take a look at some of these other names, you're seeing oftentimes 3%, 5%, 6%, 8% moves to the upside. So that's why we've been focusing on those. It's about performance, and that's what we're always shooting for. So look at crude oil, still kind of hovering around that 75 level, which is the latest move to the upside, and then sort of that pause. That's been pretty impressive. The 10-year just continues on and still holding, but just below that 1.5%. And then I look at Bitcoin, and I've been saying this now for a few, it seems like about 5, 6, 7 days, but the tightness of the range for Bitcoin and the fact that it's sitting somewhere between 33,000, 35,000. Yesterday it was trading a little bit over that 33,000 level. So interesting to watch that. Oh, and by the way, we talk about these IPOs oftentimes, and this DD is really just a cluster. But the one that really stood out for me yesterday, and my daughter brought it up to me of all things, because she says to me early on, she goes, "Hey, Dad, what do you think of donut?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" Krispy Kreme had the IPO yesterday. It was up 23% on that IPO. And the reason I emphasize the 23%. We've seen a lot of these that have had to price lower. They've had to pull back on stocks. They've not really performed as well as maybe would have been expected, at least on day one. And then we've seen better performance in following days. But this name right out of the gate was loved. It moved to the upside. It had a pretty nice performance day. It's down a little bit today, but that's a little bit to be expected after that big major move yesterday. It was down about 5% when I looked at it just a little bit earlier today. So we kick into today. We've got the long weekend. We've got jobs numbers. We've got all these things to kind of come together and factor in. So you certainly have to price in the long weekend. I look at volatility index. It was already trading right by that 15 level. The last I checked, it was trading about 14 and a half. So don't be misled. 14 and a half, yes, that's real, but let's also factor in the fact that you are pricing ahead right now. That's what we used to always do as market makers on the trading floor, because once we get that ending bell, we don't open again until after we get past Monday. So that's something to factor in as well. You got the long weekend, so keep that in mind. I talked about the 10-year being very flat. We look over at the markets. You expected maybe a little bit of movement out of that 10-year. Really aren't seeing any of that, but you are seeing the Dow once again having pretty decent participation. Early on, it was up not quite 100 points. It was up about 80 or so points. In the pre-market, it was up about 50 points or so. It actually went negative briefly. Then it started moving back to positive. The last I looked, it was trading up about 50 points. NASDAQ also was trading up about 50 points or thereabouts. In the pre-markets, it was a little bit higher than that. We haven't seen the pre-market highs just yet, but we still have plenty of day to see how this whole thing kind of unravels, and we see how the trade goes, and we see what these volumes really look like. Bitcoin, 33,000 seems to be somewhat anchored right there at that level. As I mentioned yesterday, 33,500 is 33,000 to 35,000 seems to be the range that we're in. Now, why did we see, and what are we seeing in terms of the power moves today that are kind of lifting up right now on the NASDAQ, which is definitely outperforming at this point in time, percentage-wise, outperforming the Dow? It's big cap tech. Take a look. Take a look at where Apple is today, having a pretty nice start to the day. Tesla, Google, NVIDIA, again, participating. Not tech, I understand, semiconductor, but nonetheless in that category for the NASDAQ. And certainly we continue to see some very, very strong, and we see a lot of option volume across many of these names. We've seen it all week, and we have continued to see it over the last week and a half or so. This move to the upside has come with some of the participation from some of those big cap tech names. Got two unusuals for you that I'm going to let you enjoy and trade, and then look forward to a very healthy and safe 4th of July weekend. So Walmart, first one. Stock was trading about 139.89. We had a substantial buyer, 11,800 of next Friday's expiring July 9th. The 145 calls, they were trading around 11 cents up to 26 cents. I took a look, and just to give you a little bit inside of how we work at Market Rebellion, we're not just sheep. We don't always just follow, but I take a look at something like this. I start looking at strikes that are a little bit closer to where the stock is, and some of those strikes are not all that much more costly, and they do move you a little bit closer to where the stock is now. Just to keep that in mind. I understand these are a nice, easy, cheap shot, 11,800 of those trading, so that's something, but sometimes you do want to look around and say, okay, well, what about the 141s? Where are the 141s or the 142s trading, that type of a thing? Just to give you a little bit of inside baseball on how we approach things. And we see the activity, we're following the activity, but we might not always be in exactly the same strikes, just to give you a heads up on that. KDP. Now, I don't know how many of you know this name, but Keurig Dr. Pepper. This is a really interesting name. We've seen it on a couple of occasions. We haven't seen it recently, so that way it made it a little unusual. What also makes it unusual, they're going all the way out to October. Stock was trading 35.55. They're buying the October 36 call. So call it at the money. They're just out of the money. At the money call, 7,900 of those trading. They started at $1.30. They finished, paid all the way up to about $1.60. So we'll middle it. We'll say it's about $1.40, $1.45 for these options. There's lots of time for these to play out. These aren't expiring next week. They're not expiring next month. We're going out to October. So that actually makes this trade even that much more unusual, because as we've said, everything almost exclusively has been 1 week out, 2 weeks out, maybe a month out. And then occasionally we're seeing January's. Sure, we are seeing some of the outer months, but it is definitely unusual. We haven't seen as much of that. Seems like 90% or more of what we see is very, very short term, just so you know. Folks, have a great and safe weekend. Look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. And until then, have a great day of trading.